So, just to go over some of the points that we were speaking about last week, as we enter into this last section of chapter 1. So, when we talk about the divine soul, the holy soul that is unique to the Jewish people, so later on in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe explains that this expresses itself in the capacity that a Jew has for self-sacrifice to sanctify God's name. In other words, it doesn't mean that on a day-to-day level necessarily a Jewish person behaves better than a non-Jew, or is necessarily more worthy in practice than a non-Jew. But we're talking about the capacity that is there within the soul. The second thing that we should bear in mind as we read this is that even though it talks about the souls of the nations of the world in general, it doesn't apply to every individual. It's a rule, but there are exceptions to the rule. So what are known as the Chasidei Umot Ha'olam, the pious among the nations, those that believe in God, that worship God, and that are committed to practicing the 7 Noahide laws, they are not included in this designation of their souls being from the completely impure klipas, forces of unholiness, but rather from Noga, from the translucent klipa that we spoke before, the one that is the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the mix of good and evil. So they have an aspect of good in their souls. And so that is similar to the animalistic soul of a Jewish person. So when we speak about those that have no good in them whatsoever, or even when we talk about the good that comes from the animalistic soul, right? But when we talk about not having good in oneself, we're actually talking about the common state of human beings. Really, I think the surprise in what the Alter Rebbe says is that a Jewish person, by default, has this aspect of good, this aspect of altruism that is beyond the norm. There's an interesting explanation that the Rebbe gave on the first Rashi in the Torah. So the Torah begins by saying that in the beginning God created heaven and earth. So Rashi says, why does the Torah begin with the story of creation? In order that if the nations of the world should come with a claim against the Jewish people to say you are thieves for having taken the land, for having conquered the lands of the 7 nations, the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the Jebusites and whatever the tribes that lived there before. So they will answer that the entire world belongs to God, and He gives it to whoever He finds fit. And He wanted to give it to those nations, and then He wanted to take it from them and to give it to us. So the Rebbe says, what is the argument that you are thieves for having conquered the lands of the nations? Conquest is not thievery. It's commonly accepted that nations conquer other nations, and they take their lands, and they're not considered. That's the way of the world. Nowadays we have all kinds of international laws against this, and it's still being done nevertheless. So to the extent that in the Torah we don't find any kind of criticism or any kind of saying that therefore one nation deserves punishment for having taken the lands of another nation. Conquest is considered legitimate, and people do it all the time. So why is there any kind of complaint and claim against the Jewish people that you are thieves for having conquered the lands of the 7 nations? So the Rebbe says that the complaint of the nations of the world is not that at one point, and we see this actually in the discourse today, it's not that at one point the Jewish people conquered that land. They say At one point, the Jewish people conquered that land, but later other nations conquered it from the Jewish people. So it's no longer a Jewish land. That's what the people are saying today. Just because you once lived there doesn't mean you have a right to take that land now. And we, on the other hand, are saying that this is the Holy Land. What does that mean? That when we entered the land and we conquered it from the seven nations, and we divided it up among the Jewish people, and we instituted the law of the Torah and built the temple over there, it now becomes the Holy Land. It's forever after. It is the land of Israel. It is the Jewish land. It is a Torah land, and it no longer can belong to anybody else. So that's why, that's what their argument is, and that's why the Torah begins in this way, and there has a whole explanation for what the response to that is. Why indeed there is this unique difference about the land of Israel. But what I want to draw an analogy to over here is simply to say that likewise, when it comes to talking about what's unique about the Jewish people, it's not so much saying that other people are bad, but rather saying that there is something, a unique quality that is true of the Jewish people that other people don't have. And that might that might not be so acceptable to everybody, but the point is that we're not suggesting that other people are less than human, but on the contrary, saying that there is a special empowerment that God gives the Jewish people, and this is actually because of the giving of the Torah, because He gave us the Torah in order for us to be able to implement God's vision through the Torah in the world, that we have unique spiritual capabilities and empowerments that other peoples don't have. So therefore, none of this should be. No, it shouldn't be. It never was, and it isn't any kind of justification for mistreating other peoples, for considering them to be subhuman. Like there are other nations and other instances in which people have, let's say, racist ideologies. That the idea was to say that people that are either of a certain race or not of our race are, not worthy of basic human rights and things like that. That has nothing to do with anything that the Torah is saying or that is being said here in Tanya. Besides the fact that we're not talking about race over here, but it's not even a suggestion. It's forbidden to steal from a non-Jew. It's forbidden to harm a non-Jew. It's certainly forbidden to murder a non-Jew. There's no question about that. These are clear in halacha. So that's not that is not at all the suggestion over here. So why should we make this kind of distinction? So first of all, as the Jewish people, we have a purpose in the world. We have a mission in the world, and that was begun at the time of the giving of the Torah. And we need to recognize that, we need to appreciate that, and to know that we have something unique to give to the world. It is our responsibility to do it, both towards God as well as towards the world at large. And I think, and I haven't done a lot of reading up on this recently, so I may be a little bit off base, but I think that in general terms, among certain Jewish thinkers, and I think that this would be at least close to what somebody like the Rambam would say. So in Tehillim and Psalms, it says, and we say this in the daily prayers, that God tells his words to Jacob, his statutes and his laws to Israel. He has not done this to any other nation, and their laws they don't know of. Hallelujah. Right, praise God. That's Psalm 146, 147 ends that way, right? So one way of understanding that would be to say that the laws of the Torah are the laws of how a person, a human being, can reach perfection. God showed special favor to the Jewish people by giving us the Torah, by informing us of those laws and those ways, so that we would be able to reach the life of the world to come. And the other nations don't know the laws, and therefore, that shows the special favor that God has bestowed on us. But that could be understood as saying that theoretically, at least, peoples of the world would be able to keep the Torah and become perfected human beings, but for whatever reason, they weren't worthy of receiving those laws. The way that the Alter Rebbe presents it here in Tanya, and again, this is not the Alter Rebbe's innovation. These are ideas that he's drawing on from earlier sources also, but he's definitely being very clear about things being in a certain way. That if a non-Jew were to keep the commandments of the Torah, it wouldn't have the impact that it has when a Jew keeps the commandments of the Torah. As a Jewish man puts on tefillin, then they bring down into the world certain divine revelations. So, they fulfill God's will, and they bring a higher consciousness of God into the world. If a non-Jewish person puts on tefillin, it has no effect. It's like if you put the tefillin on the table. It doesn't right. It's not the mitzvah. They don't become a better person by wearing the tefillin. If a Jew keeps Shabbos, then they bring a tremendous holiness, the holiness of Shabbos, into the world, and they transform the world. If a non-Jew keeps Shabbos, it's nothing. It doesn't bring that holiness, and on the contrary, it's something that is not really appropriate for a non-Jew to keep Shabbos. So the theory behind this is, why is it that a Jew does this act and it has one effect, and a non-Jew does the act and it does not have that effect? So the answer is two things. Number one, that these acts that the Torah is prescribing for us, the acts that are not the 7 Noahide laws, but the special mitzvahs that apply specifically to the Jewish people, it's not a matter of good versus bad, that if you do them, you're doing good and doing right, and if you don't do them, then you're doing bad or you're doing wrong. Those are basic ideas, right? Not murdering, not stealing, not committing sexual immorality, the other of the 7 Noahide laws. Though that's a matter of right and wrong, and everybody's obligated to conduct themselves in that way. And when you do that, then you're doing the right thing, and you're making the world a civilized place, and you're allowing society to function and people to thrive, and the world to function as it should. So that so that's a good place, the way God wants it. But for a Jewish person, our mitzvah goes beyond that. That is a matter of bringing holiness into the world. It's a matter of bringing godliness into the world, of bringing the consciousness of God and the experience of God in a more real way, in a more immediate way, into the worldly reality, which is really something that is not on its own within the realm of human capability. That is something that we have to have a special empowerment from God to be able to accomplish that. When God gave us the Torah and He gave us a divine soul, that is what enables us to carry out, to perform those commandments, and through them to actually achieve the impact on the world that they're supposed to have. So that's why the Alter Rebbe, again, among others, and drawing on earlier sources, is emphasizing that there is an ontological difference between Jew and non-Jew, that there is a fundamental difference. It's not just a difference of action. It's not just a coincidence of history that this nation accepted the Torah and that nation didn't accept the Torah, but that there is a fundamental difference between us as far as what our abilities are, and that for a Jew it's necessary to conduct themselves as a Jew should according to the Torah in order for them to not only to reach their potential, but to carry out and to implement in the world that which God has put us here to do. And for a non-Jew, it's necessary for them to conduct themselves in the way that the Torah prescribes for a non-Jew in order for them to carry out what God wants of them in the world. And we shouldn't cross wires. We shouldn't mix up our approaches and our ways of doing things, because that's not beneficial neither on the one side nor on the other side.
This whole idea of Jews having a soul that's God, it sounds like we're saying that we are God, basically. Feels like a very Christian idea.
Blurring the line. So I don't know that I've seen this anywhere explicitly, but it's something that occurred to me, that part of the reason why, in general, mysticism, Kabbalah, was restricted as far as how widely it was disseminated, it was because of the danger of that many of the ideas come very close to different forms of idolatry, and there's a reason why it's necessary to go that far, but knowing exactly where that line is, it's possible for people to cross the line. One of the classic kind of connotations that people note about Kabbalah is what they call antinomianism, which is the idea of abolishing the laws. That some of the ideas even in Jewish mysticism could lead one to the conclusion that at least at some point, whether the person reaches a certain level or the world reaches a certain level, that the laws of the Torah are abolished. And the classic example of that, of course, is Shabtai Tzvi, the false Messiah in the 17th century, who did indeed declare certain laws of the Torah as no longer operative. And the Christians have done it as well. That's right. So there's a well-known story or discussion that is brought down actually by the Alter Rebbe's grandson. He cites this book in one of his discourses where there was an individual, a great rabbi, who argued against the Kabbalists. And he said, I don't understand what all this Kabbalah is about. He said, you talk about these 10 sfirot, 10 emanations of God or whatever it is. He says, the Christians talk about 3 and you talk about 10. I don't see the difference. And he said, as far as, what you're supposed to have in mind when you pray, which sphera a particular prayer is associated with, he said, for me, it's enough to pray the way that the child understands. When a child prays, he doesn't know about all these various levels and emanations and aspects. He knows he's talking to God, and that's it. And he said, for me, it's enough to pray the way that the child understands. Again, in that discourse, the Tzemach Tzedek then goes on to respond to that and to talk about what the significance of the various Kabbalistic levels are. But I do agree that there are many teachings that at least can come quite close to ideas that are found in that we consider already beyond the pale, already consider idolatry. So, with regard to this particular idea, I think that to really understand the concept of the divine soul, for that you have to study chapter 2 of Tanya. So we're gonna have to finish chapter 1 to get there. But in general, I think that the important distinction is that whatever it is that they say about we call Oto Ha'ish, about that individual in Judaism.
He was also a Jew, so he did have a divine soul.
So I actually have heard that people respond that way, to say you're no different than any other Jew. Of course, that's not what they're arguing. They're saying that he was uniquely God incarnate, and therefore. But what they do say is that he is the intermediary to God, that you have to pray to him in order to get to God. So praying to a human being is an act of worship. That is the Rambam.
We pray at the Ohel. Why is that any different?
So I was talking to Mike about this the other week, that the Zohar has a whole discussion of why it is. Well, there the question is slightly different. That there's a prohibition against communing with the dead. So the Zohar explains why that's not a problem when you go to the gravesites of a tzaddik. But indeed, when you go to the gravesite of a tzaddik, it's not a matter of praying to the tzaddik, but because that is a holy place, just like a synagogue is a holy place. That's also or the kotel is a holy place. So that's also a holy place, and the prayers are accepted more readily there. But not to make a human being an object of worship. Nevertheless, a lot of times the distinctions are quite fine, and they need time and thought to really understand properly, and there is a danger in that, and that is why I think that is at least part of the reason why, in fact, Kabbalah, mysticism, mystical ideas were not made available for public consumption. What the Rebbes have argued with regard to Hasidus and regard to Chabad in particular is that when a person studies the teachings of Chabad, so these matters are explained in a way, in a manner of Chabad, in a manner of Chachma Bina Dat, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, in a way that we're able to comprehend and to relate to, that they're not just esoteric mystical ideas that are above our comprehension entirely, but the Chabad teaching provides analogies and explanations that help us to properly understand these ideas, so that we don't end up crossing over into forbidden beliefs or ideas because of our exposure to what it says in the Arizal or in Zohar or whatever it is, but that we do have a correct and a nuanced understanding of what they're saying. So just another couple of points to make before we continue, and this has more to do with the question of race or biology. So later in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe talks about this concept called the innate hidden love that is within the Jewish soul, that we have because of this godly soul, because of this divine soul. And he says that the fact that the Jewish people have this unique divine soul, this is a reward that God gave to the patriarchs, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, because of their superior devotion to God, to the extent of self-sacrifice, and they displayed this tremendous love for God, that God gave them as a reward, that their descendants after them, particularly those that at the time of the giving of the Torah, would be endowed with this godly soul, which would part of which is this inherent latent love for God that is activated, especially when a Jew is faced with a situation where they're being asked to sanctify God's name by martyring themselves. So it's not so. So the element of choice, in other words, in some ways, yes, a person is born a Jew, and so it's an inborn quality, but it's only inborn because of a choice that was made by ancestors in the past, and it also doesn't automatically reflect on the person. The person has to activate it and has to use those resources that were being given. And then, of course, there's the idea of conversion, which means that a person who is not born Jewish also has the possibility, if they are so moved and come to that understanding within themselves that that's the correct path for them to enter into the covenant that God made with the Jewish people, and thereby to be endowed also with this godly soul. And then finally, like I said last week, at the end of the day, if we look at the way Torah in general and the Rebbes of Chabad, the Rebbe have treated and interacted with non-Jews, we see that it is in a way of respect and dignity and uprightness, and not in the way of taking advantage, God forbid, but on the contrary, to encourage. I mean, the Rebbe in particular began I don't know if you want to call it a campaign, but at least the drive and the push to inform the non-Jewish world about the 7 Noahide laws and to encourage goodness and kindness on the part of all human beings, regardless of their nation or background, and all in an effort to create the ideal world, for the coming of Mashiach. So, okay, so let's dive into it. Hopefully, you have your text in front of you. Not to have that, you can read over here if you'd like. You got to listen. Okay, so we are in the very end of chapter 1. Masha Ein Kain, whereas the souls of the nations of the world. So the Alter Rebbe says, Masha Ein Kain, it is otherwise with not nafshot umot haolam, with the souls of the nations of the world. Hein mishar klipot tmeot, they derive from the other impure klipot, the forces of unholiness, which are 3, and we'll talk about them more in chapter 6. She'ein bahen tov klal. These have no good in them whatsoever. Whereas the klipat noga, the translucent klipa, is a mixture of good and bad, like the tree of knowledge was a tree of knowledge of both good and bad. The three impure klipot have no good in them whatsoever. Even that has to be qualified. Everything has a spark of holiness in them. It's just that in this case, it has become so dimmed that it no longer has a direct impact. As it is written in Eitz Chaim from the Arizal in the 49th gate, the 3rd chapter, he writes as much. Over there he discusses the characteristics of the souls of Klipa. And now he says, kind of a quote. This is from part of the Zohar. It says, "V'chol tivu da'avdin ha'omot l'garmayu abdin." All good that are done by the nations are done for their own benefit. They're done for selfish motives. So this is really a bit of a paraphrase of what it says in Tikkunei Zohar, but there it says Kol Chesed Da'avdin, all the kindness that are done, that they do, and it's a reference to the nations of the world, is done for their personal benefit. And now we're gonna mention a passage in the Gemara. So Let's first go through the passage a little bit, and we'll see from this, we'll get a better idea of what we mean by saying that it's for personal benefit. What are we talking about? What is, you know, we're not saying that people are not capable of good. People do good all the time. But what is he saying about the nature of the good that people do? So this is a bit of a lengthy piece, but we'll go through it. So this is from the Talmud in Bava Batra, and there it says as follows: It is taught in a Baraita. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai said to his students, "My sons, what is the meaning of that which the verse states?" I'll say it in Hebrew: "Staka teromein goy." Righteousness exalts a nation. Chesed li'umim chatat, but the kindness of the people is sin. What is the meaning of this verse? And maybe the question is that there seems to be a bit of a contradiction. Does righteousness exalt a nation, or is the kindness of the people sin? So his students respond. So Rabbi Eliezer answered and said, "Righteousness exalts a nation. These are the people of Israel, as it is written, and who is like your people Israel, one nation on the earth." So the word goy, tzedakah romain goy, refers to the Jewish people who are called goy echad ba'aretz, one nation on the earth. As for the second half of the verse, but the kindness of the peoples is a sin, meaning that all the acts of charity and kindness that the nations of the world perform is counted as a sin for them, since they perform them only to elevate themselves in prestige. So in Hebrew, litkadel, they perform kindness so that they become greater. Yeah, to elevate themselves in prestige. And he says, the verse, as it is stated in Ezra, that they may sacrifice offerings of pleasing aroma to the God of heaven and pray for the life of the king and of his sons. So this is the edict that has been given out by, I think, by Cyrus or whatever, to rebuild the temple. And why is he giving permission, and why is he urging that the temple be rebuilt? In order that they pray for the life of the king and his sons. Okay, so that's one answer. So the Gemara asks, and if one acts this way, is it not a full-fledged charity? That is the mitzvah of tzedakah. That's the mitzvah of charity. Isn't it taught in a Braita that one who says, "I'm contributing this tzela, this coin, to charity, so that my sons will live," or if he says, "I'm performing the mitzvah so that I will merit a share in the world to come," this person is considered a tzaddik gamor. He's a full-fledged righteous person. So that would seem to say that doing charity for some personal gain is a perfectly valid form of charity, to the extent that the Talmud, that the Baraita says that such a person is a tzaddik gamor, is completely righteous. So the Gemara answers, this is not difficult. Here, the statement that he's considered absolutely righteous is with regard to a Jew, while there, the statement that such benefaction is not credited as charity is with regard to a Gentile. Okay, so I'm not sure exactly how that answers the questions, but that's interesting to know. Rashi actually explains. He says that when a Jew does this, he actually means it for the sake of God. In other words, the Jew is giving charity in order that my son may live, or in order that I will merit the world to come. But if that doesn't happen, he doesn't regret doing the charity. Whereas the non-Jew is, if he doesn't get the benefit out of the mitzvah, then they regret having done it. Okay, the Gemara now offers another interpretation. Rabbi Yoshua, another disciple of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, answers his master's challenge, and he says, "Righteousness exalts a nation, these are the people of Israel, as it is written, and who is like the people of Israel, one nation on the earth." Okay, that's the same as before. But the kindness of the peoples is sin, means that all the acts of charity and kindness that the nations of the world perform is counted as a sin for them, since they perform them only to perpetuate their dominion. Kedesha timashech malchutan. So this he bases on what is stated by Daniel to Nebuchadnezzar, to the king of Babylon. "Therefore, O king, let my counsel be acceptable to you, and break off your sins by charity and your iniquities by showing mercy to the poor, that there may be an extension of your serenity. So over there, Nebuchadnezzar had this terrible dream, and he was afraid for his future. The dream suggested that he would be punished for all of his misdeeds, and Daniel counsels him, and he says, you should give charity, and that will extend your serenity. So the charity that the nations of the world do is only to perpetuate their dominion. That's the second explanation that's given. And then there's a third explanation from Rabban Gamliel. Rabban Gamliel answered and said, righteousness exalts a nation. These are the people of Israel, as it is written, and who is like your people Israel, one nation on the earth. But the kindness of the peoples, the sin, chesed umim chatat, means that all the acts of charity and kindness that the nations of the world perform is counted as a sin for them, since they perform them only in order to act heartily through them. So the word in Hebrew is lehityaher, in order to boast. And whoever acts heartily falls into Gehenna, into purgatory. As it is stated, the proud and haughty one, scorner is his name, acts in arrogant wrath. And wrath means nothing other than Gehenna, as it is stated, that day is the day of wrath. So saying that the reason why the kindness of the nations is a sin is because it induces them to be arrogant. And when one is arrogant, one ends up in Gehenna. So that's the response of Rabban Gamliel. And then the Braita continues, Rabban Gamliel said, we still need to hear what the Modai has to say. As Rabbi Eliezer HaModai says, he gave another interpretation. Righteousness exalts a nation. These are the people of Israel, as it is written, and who is like your people Israel, one nation on the earth. But the kindness of the peoples is sin, means that all the acts of charity and kindness that the nations of the world perform is counted as a sin for them, since they perform them only to taunt us with them. That it's more than that they do it for personal benefit, and it's more than they do it to aggrandize themselves. They do it in order to taunt us with them. As it is stated that the Babylonian officer Nebuzaradan said, the Lord has brought it and done according as he has said, because you have sinned against the Lord and have not obeyed his voice. Therefore, this matter has come upon you. So, okay, I'm not sure how he derives it from that verse, but at any rate, that's that is what Rabbi Eliezer HaModai says. And then finally, we have the opinion of Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakana. And he says that righteousness exalts a nation refers to Israel. And kindness of the people is a sin. What he says is, he reads the verse differently. He says, righteousness exalts a nation and kindness. Righteousness, in other words, righteousness and kindness exalts the Jewish people. And for the other peoples, is sin. They only have sin. Okay. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said to his students, having heard all of their comments, the statement of Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakana appears to be more precise than both my statement and your statements, because he assigns both righteousness and kindness to Israel and sin to the peoples of the world. The Gemara asks, by inference, it appears that he, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, also offered an interpretation of this verse. What is it? What did he say? As it is taught in the Braita, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said to them that the verse should be understood as follows. Just as a sin offering atones for Israel, so charity atones for the nations of the world. So he had a very complimentary interpretation of this verse, but the students all said that, according to Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakana, there is no kindness among the nations. It's only sin. The others said that the nations do perform acts of kindness, but they perform them for personal reasons. And let's go back to Rabbi Gamliel, who said that they perform them only in order to act heartily through them. Okay, so let's see how it says in Tanya. He says, Gemara, as is written in the Gemara, al pasuk, on this verse, that the kindness of the nations is sin, that all of the righteousness the charity and the kindness that are done by the nations of the world, einan ela lityaher chulu, it is all in order to aggrandize themselves. So the Alter Rebbe chooses one of the answers that are given over here. One way of understanding is that this is kind of a general idea that encompasses the other answers that are given. That they do it to become greater, for greater prestige. They do it for a longer period of serenity and peace in their kingdom. But this is all a matter of doing it for personal benefit. So it's not the case that if somebody has a soul that is from the three entirely impure klipot, that they don't do anything actually good. They could do a lot of good, but they do it for personal benefit. So we can kind of differentiate between three levels over here. One level is where a person does good for the benefit that they get out of it, whatever that benefit might be. And if they don't get that benefit, they regret having done the good. Then you have a higher level, and this is also exists among more special individuals among the nations of the world, but not everyone, which is that they do good for good sake. They do, but they don't do it if it would be at their own expense. They're going to do good not because they're going to get anything out of it, but to actually stick their neck out. That's something that is much more unique. Then there's a higher level, and this comes from holiness, where it can be done even to the extent of self-sacrifice. A person can do good even to the extent of self-sacrifice, where they completely lose out as a result. Also, we have to emphasize that over here we're talking about the inborn nature that comes from the soul, and not the possibility that a person can also override their nature and by choice do something that is that does not come naturally to them, but that is done as an act of virtue. So, and again, going back to the original point that the Alter Rebbe made over here earlier, is that even with regard to the Jewish people, when a person does good because of their nature, that is not coming from the godly soul. That is coming from the animal soul. We have good. The animal soul is a mixture of good and bad, and you can do acts of goodness from the animal soul also. In order to do it from the godly soul, it has to be something that's not just because of your nature, but that you're doing it for a purpose. The Alter Rebbe's grandson, Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Lubavitch, at Tzemach Tzedek, wrote summaries of the chapters of Tanya. So I'll just conclude with a summary of the Tzemach Tzedek on chapter 1. So he says that in this chapter, the Alter Rebbe raises the question from the Breita at the end of the third chapter of Nida, where the Breita says that a person should consider themselves to be wicked, to be a rasha, and he contrasts this with what is taught in Pirkei Avot, that a person should not consider themselves, should not be a rasha, should not be wicked in their own eyes. And he notes parenthetically that the meaning of this Breita will be explained in chapters 13 and 14. So that's where the answer to that question is. Further, the Alter Rebbe asks on this Breita that if a person considers themselves to be wicked, then they will not be able to serve God with joy. They'll be downcast. So, and the explanation of this Mishnah and Breita will be explained in from chapter 29 until chapter 34. There he explains the concept of serving God with joy. So at the end of those chapters, 29 to 34, the answer to this question is given as to how it's possible for a person to both consider themselves to be wicked and to serve God with joy. He goes on to say that the Alter Rebbe explains that in order to understand all this, we have to first preface the 5 categories that are given in the Gemara, that we have the tzaddik, two kinds of tzaddik, the complete tzaddik, the imperfect tzaddik, the rasha and the imperfect rasha, and the Beinoni, the middle person. And the meaning of Beinoni is not that the person has half virtues and half sins, and that a tzaddik is one who has a majority of virtues, because that is only correct with regard to reward or punishment. Who is considered a tzaddik or a beinoni with regard to how they're rewarded. But when we want to talk about the true meaning, the true level of beinoni, we have to understand that that is somebody who has no transgressions. And this will be explained in chapter 12. And the tzaddik will be explained in chapter 10. So all of this, these are issues that have been raised here, and they will be explained by that at some point later in Tanya. And the beginning of the explanation of all of this is based on the teaching of Rabbi Chaim Vital, the preeminent disciple of Rabbi Yitzchak Luria the Arizal, that each Jewish individual has two souls. So here we've spoken about the first soul, the one that stems from the spiritual levels of Klipat Noga, the translucent Klipa, the translucent forces of unholiness that have some light in them, and this is called animalistic. And from this soul derive all of the bad characteristics, the bad inclinations that come from the four basic elements, spiritual elements that the soul is composed of. And there are also the good character traits that come naturally to a person, come from this soul, because Klipat Noga, the translucent Klipa, is comprised of both good and bad, whereas the souls of the nations of the world are from the three entirely impure Klipot. So that is chapter 1, and God willing, next time we will go on to chapter 2.